The first time a Morsian saw a human eating a sandwich before a battle, it caused a major diplomatic problem. Commander Lyrics had been certain humans were a weak species. Their bodies looked soft and lazy, like creatures made for comfort, not war. But the Council wanted first-hand observations before attacking Earth, and Lyrics reluctantly agreed to inspect Earth's defenses personally. He never expected to find soldiers relaxing around their bases, playing card games, laughing at jokes, and calmly eating sandwiches right before fighting. Lyrics thought this was incompetence. This mistake would be his last. The Morsians believed war required ritual chants, body painting, and speeches about honor. Humans did none of that. They joked about smelling bad, patted each other's backs, and argued about who had the worst food. Some even napped on the grass with their boots still on. Lyrics wrote his report with disgust. This species cannot take war seriously. That night, the humans attacked. It wasn't a neat, organized assault like Morsian tactics. It was chaos, improvised and fierce. Soldiers who had been sleeping an hour earlier now moved like wolves through enemy defenses, using dirt, broken machinery, even dead enemies to gain every advantage. They fought in near silence except for short, sharp orders, and their faces were frightening not because they looked angry, but because they seemed almost bored. Private Dawson, a young man from a dying steel town, shot 3 Morsian warriors while still holding his sandwich. When he ducked behind smoking ruins to reload, he mumbled through his bread, "This better end before lunch." The next day, Morsian generals met in horror. They had underestimated humanity's greatest evolutionary trick, their ability to separate emotion from violence. Other species fought for glory. Humans fought because someone had interrupted their quiet afternoon. Lyrics sat stone-faced watching recordings from the battlefield. He saw men jumping onto explosives without hesitation to save friends. He saw soldiers making deadly traps from rusty metal and wire within minutes of being cornered. He saw them take weapons from dead enemies and use them against their owners, without thinking twice. One scene haunted Lyrics most: a group of humans with their backs against a cliff, low on bullets, bleeding from many wounds, and laughing, genuinely laughing. It wasn't madness. It was laughter that said, "If this is the end, so be it, but we'll make sure you're coming with us." The Morsians had no words for this. Their minds couldn't understand it. When Lyrics asked for a full psychological analysis of humans, his advisors returned with a single line. They fight hardest when they have nothing left to lose. Desperate to understand what turned seemingly fragile humans into ruthless killers, the Council sent hundreds of secret observation teams across Earth. Their orders were simple: blend in, study humans, and find what triggers them. Some Morsians posed as exchange students. Some opened small shops. Some even became taxi drivers, collecting every bit of human behavior they could. At first, the reports confused them. Humans were emotional, easily distracted by jokes, obsessed with small rituals like celebrating the anniversary of some battle won centuries ago. Then patterns emerged. The first thing to set off a human wasn't survival. It was betrayal. Humans could endure poverty, disaster, and war, but betrayal lit something deeper than any survival instinct. Stories came in of quiet men working dead-end, jobs without complaint until someone they trusted wronged them. Then they moved with an intensity that surprised even their own kind. These betrayals didn't just make them angry, they focused them. The second trigger was loss, not their own suffering, but the suffering of someone they cared about: family, friends, fellow soldiers. Humanity's most dangerous warriors weren't created by personal ambition, but by grief, loyalty, and the primal need to protect others, even after those others were gone. Finally, and most disturbing, humans could commit complete violence once they mentally detached from their emotions. A human might mourn his enemy after a battle, even feel sorry for him, but during the fight he became pure calculation. They joked through fear. They laughed through pain. They solved problems as if playing a simple board game, even if the problems involved burning cities and seas of blood. Lyrics saw this firsthand during the third attack on New Kyoto. The Morsians had surrounded a human outpost, cutting off all supplies for weeks. The humans endured hunger, disease, and bombardment. Then, without warning, the outpost exploded outward in a savage counterattack. Men who hadn't eaten a full meal in days sprinted into battle without helmets, faces marked with ash, using broken rifles as clubs. They cut through Morsian ranks, moving with an eerie, silent coordination. In the center of the charge was a weathered sergeant known only as Holden. He wielded a captured energy cannon like a battering ram, swinging it into enemy lines with such force that even the Morsian war machines buckled. Every time Holden smashed through another rank, he shouted the same thing over and over. "You shouldn't have made me miss my son's birthday." It wasn't just anger, it was personal. The Morsians learned that day that humanity didn't fight because they enjoyed it. They fought because someone made them. And when that happened, every small grudge, every heartbreak, every broken promise became fuel for a fire that no enemy could hope to put out. On the orbiting flagship, Lyric stood before the Council of Elders. His body was beaten, his pride shattered. "There is no ritual that controls them," he said bitterly. "No tradition we can use against them. They don't need honor or permission. Hurt them, or worse, hurt those they love, and they will stop. At nothing to destroy you," the council murmured uneasily. One of the elders, a frail old tactician named Dreen, leaned forward. "Then we shall appeal to their reason. Surely they must want survival over destruction." Lyric shook his head. "They only care about survival until someone makes them angry enough to forget fear." The council called an emergency meeting. It was clear that traditional conquest was impossible. Even if they killed millions, the rest would rise with even greater fury. Worse, humans didn't seem to distinguish between soldiers and civilians when provoked. A farmer with a broken tool could become just as deadly as a trained soldier if given reason. The Morsians debated retreat. They debated negotiation. Some whispered about simply leaving humans alone, as one might back away from a growling animal, in the dark. But pride held them back. So they tried one final tactic: show overwhelming power. They gathered the Dread Fleet, 100 warships bristling with weapons from 1,000 conquered worlds. The plan was simple: appear in Earth's orbit, show undeniable superiority, and demand surrender before firing a single shot. The fleet arrived over Earth at night. Communication towers buzzed to life. Every screen on the planet showed the same message: surrender and live. For a few minutes there was silence. Then Earth answered. The humans didn't send politicians. They didn't send ambassadors. They sent a man named Captain Elliot. He appeared on every screen, a worn leather jacket over his uniform, arms crossed, a slight smile on his face. He said only 9 words before cutting the transmission. "You're not the first to try. Won't be the last." And behind him, framed in the camera's view, the skies began to darken, not with storm clouds but with ships. Hundreds of them, thousands, and everyone built by humans. Not sleek, elegant vessels like the Morsians preferred, but ugly, brutal. Things covered with improvised armor, weapons pieced together from many different technologies, engines roaring with raw, violent energy. They hadn't built a fleet to win. They had built a fleet to make sure that if they lost, they would drag the enemy to hell with them. The Dread Fleet didn't retreat. Pride ran too deep in Morsian blood. Instead, Admiral Xenox, highest-ranking commander among them, ordered his ships to close formation. Their warships tightened ranks, energy weapons charging, disruption systems humming. Earth's defenses would crumble in the first volley, he believed. Humanity could bluff all it wanted, but the Dread Fleet had crushed empires older and more advanced than Earth's pitiful civilization. In the command bay of the human flagship Resistance, Captain Elliot leaned back in his seat, chewing lazily. on an unlit cigar. Around him, human officers moved with casual urgency, a kind of controlled recklessness that the Martians would have mistaken for madness. Radar technicians, communications officers, engineers, none showed fear. They joked about what beers they'd drink after the battle, made bets about who'd score the first hit, and passed around family photos taped to their control panels. Elliot tapped the side of his chair with 2 fingers. "Time?" he asked. 17 minutes until they're in range, sir," said Sergeant Winters from the tactical station. Elliot nodded. "Send it." Across every human ship, a single command flashed onto screens. "Initiate Scorched Earth Protocol." It was the kind of order no sane species would ever willingly create, let alone activate. But humans were different. They were the only ones who understood that sometimes the only path to survival was to become something worse than the enemy could imagine. The first move came from human cargo ships. They weren't warships in the usual sense, just ugly, bulky freight haulers repurposed for battle. Panels slid open along their hulls, and dozens of launchers unfolded like the jaws of ancient siege weapons. They didn't fire missiles or energy beams. They fired scrap, giant chunks of sharpened metal, twisted steel bars, and broken engine parts, all accelerated to incredible speeds with magnetic launchers. It was crude. It was brutal. It was devastating. The Dread Fleet's energy shields, designed for energy attacks, were useless against the sheer mass of the projectiles. The first volley smashed through the outer ring of Morsian ships, puncturing hulls, shattering bridge windows, and sending chunks of flaming debris spiraling into Earth's atmosphere. Xenix's command ship shuddered under the impact. "Shields failing in sectors 6 through 9, an officer screeched. Xenix snarled and slammed his clawed fist onto the console. "Return fire! Annihilate them!" But the human ships were already moving. They didn't hold position as the Morsians expected. They scattered, broke formation, became dozens of independent packs of wolves circling the herd. Some dove toward Earth's atmosphere, daring the Dread Fleet to follow. Others rocketed into the blackness of space, flanking wide and unpredictable, using debris fields from wrecked ships as cover. They fought like they lived, dirty, clever, and without regard for any rule the enemy expected them to follow. On the bridge of the Resistance, Elliot grinned. "Lesson 1, he muttered, half to himself. "You don't hurt humans." The Dread Fleet adjusted tactics, splitting into wings to hunt down the smaller human craft. It was a mistake. With their numbers divided, they became vulnerable. Human squadrons lured them into minefields, hidden among orbital junkyards, into ambushes behind shattered satellites, into crossfire corridors between civilian space stations whose shields had been secretly upgraded months ago. In less than an hour, 28 Morsian ships were reduced to burning skeletons. Xenox couldn't believe it. His fleet, unbeaten for centuries, was being picked apart by an enemy that used garbage as weapons and abandoned stations as fortresses. "This is impossible," he snarled. But the reports kept coming. Fires on deck, hull breaches, boarding parties. And that was the real terror. The humans weren't content to fight at a distance. Once they crippled a Morsian ship, they boarded it. They came swarming through breach points in makeshift armor, wielding everything from energy rifles to sharpened pipes. They fought with a reckless, wild energy that overwhelmed even the most disciplined Morsian defenders. Private Cruz was the first human to breach the flagship Varix. Helmet cracked, bleeding from the forehead, he charged down the corridor with a fire axe in one hand and a repurposed mining drill in the other. Behind him stormed dozens more like him, engineers. Miners, farmers turned soldiers. They smashed through bulkheads, cut through security doors, and tore through defensive lines with a violence that suggested they had long since stopped caring about their own survival. And every time they were driven back, they just regrouped and came again, stronger and meaner. Because the humans knew something the Morsians hadn't learned yet. Survival wasn't about winning clean. It was about making sure the other side couldn't even imagine coming back for a second try. Back aboard the Resistance, Elliot watched a diagram of the battle unfold. He chewed thoughtfully on his unlit cigar, studying the dwindling number of enemy ships. "They still don't get it," Sergeant Winters said quietly beside him. "Nope," Elliot said. "They think we're fighting to save Earth." He finally pulled the cigar from his mouth and twirled it between two fingers. "We're not," he said. "We're fighting because they showed up." He leaned forward, voice dropping to a low growl. "And because we were bored. The humans had fought for survival before, against famine, against nature, against each other. But deep in their bones there was something more dangerous. A raw, primal urge not just to survive, but to prove to the universe, to each other, maybe even to themselves, that no one could come into their home and push them around." On the outer edges of the battlefield, Morsian reinforcements arrived, smaller escort ships, experimental bombers, drone swarms. Xenox rallied what remained of his fleet, gathering around the supercarrier Navarre. "Final assault!" he barked. "We crush them now!" The Morsian ships roared forward in a last desperate charge, but humanity had been expecting that. Elliot's orders snapped across human communications like a whip. Initiate Ragnarok Protocol. The second phase of Earth's defense revealed itself. Hidden weapon platforms built into asteroids disguised as abandoned ships came online. Massive railguns, energy. Lances, fusion torpedoes, weapons designed not to defend but to destroy. Every hidden gunner, every buried station, every weaponized orbital rig activated at once, lighting up the dark space with a fury that made even Earth's own forces pause in awe. In the cockpit of a damaged fighter, Lieutenant Foster whooped as he fired into the charging Morsian line. "Now you're in our house," he shouted, and in the deepest part of Earth's orbit, something else woke up. The Behemoth, a human dreadnought unlike anything ever seen before. It was not sleek. It was not beautiful. It was a floating fortress, a mountain of armor and destruction, built from a dozen ruined warships, equipped with weapons salvaged from every alien species humanity had ever fought. It drifted forward slowly, as if savoring the moment. Xenax stared at it in horror from his command deck. "What? What is that?" he whispered. On the Resistance, Elliot smiled grimly as the Behemoth opened its main cannon. A monstrous magnetic gun capable of firing asteroids as ammunition. "That's what happens," he said softly, "when you make us mad enough to build something just to spite you." The battle was far from over, but the tide had turned. The Behemoth moved like a slow, unstoppable storm. Even at full power, its engines produced only a steady crawl. But it didn't matter. It wasn't built for speed. It was built for destruction. The first shot from its main gun cracked space itself, firing a chunk of asteroid the size of a shuttle directly through the hull of the Morsian supercarrier Navarre. The mighty flagship split apart like paper in a hurricane, its fragments scattering into the void. Panic spread through what remained of the dread fleet. Ships broke formation, turning to flee. Orders from Xenax screamed across the command network, but discipline collapsed. It was every ship for itself now, but retreat wasn't survival. The humans had planned for that too. Hidden behind Earth's moon, a second wave of human destroyers emerged from hiding, smaller, faster, perfectly positioned to intercept any fleeing vessels. They weren't just chasing victory, they were sealing it. On board the Resistance, Captain Elliot leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Send the message," he said. Sergeant Winters tapped the console. Across every communication channel, across every frequency, the Morsians used a single human phrase echoed, "You started this. We'll finish it." The Behemoth continued its advance, indifferent to the chaos around it. Its secondary weapons fired in coordinated volleys, punching holes through enemy cruisers and bombardment platforms alike. No Morsian weapon could pierce its armor. No Morsian tactic could slow its march. On the Morsian flagship, Xenox gripped the armrests of his command chair. He refused to flee. He would go down with his ship if necessary, but he would not run from creatures he once considered primitive. He issued a final order: ram the behemoth. If the humans wanted total war, they would pay for every inch. His vessel, the Karzak, burned its engines at maximum output, hurtling toward the human dreadnought. Its hull glowed red-hot from atmospheric friction, plating buckling from the stress. On the Resistance, Elliot watched the suicidal maneuver unfold. He gave no orders to evade. Instead, he waited. When the Karzak was within 2,000 meters, the behemoth responded, not with its main gun, not with missiles. The forward bay doors opened, and from within poured a swarm of smaller human ships, gunboats, drop ships, fighters, all repurposed, repainted, jury-rigged to carry explosives and impact weapons. They surged like a wave of steel and fire, battering the Karzak from all sides. The Morsian ship never made it. It broke apart mid-charge, torn open from 1,000 coordinated strikes. Debris fanned outward in a burning halo around the behemoth, raining down into Earth's atmosphere where they lit the skies like a mockery of falling stars. Xenox's death scream never reached his fleet. When the flagship's core exploded, the remaining Morsian forces abandoned all hope. Some fled into deep space, silent and dark, hoping to vanish beyond human reach. Others surrendered outright, transmitting desperate pleas across open channels. Humanity gave no pursuit to those who fled. Earth's defenders regrouped, letting the survivors limp away into the void to carry home a single, unquestionable truth. You do not invade Earth. You do not provoke humanity. You certainly do not mistake their kindness, their laughter, their lazy afternoons for weakness. On board the Resistance, Elliot finally leaned back, the tension easing from his shoulders. Around him, the bridge crew erupted into cheers, backslaps, and shouts of victory. Someone opened a bottle of hidden whiskey, passing it around with careless joy. Elliot allowed himself a rare smile. "Well," he said, taking the cigar from his pocket and lighting it at last, "guess it's lunchtime." Down on Earth, the skies cleared. Humanity, scarred but unbroken, looked up and knew one thing beyond any doubt. They had survived not because they were stronger, not because they were smarter, but because when pushed, they became something far more terrifying than any invader could understand. They became human, and there was no force in the galaxy more dangerous than that.